Hello, I'm Peter Venn. I'm on the final jury for this year's Animal Nature Future Film Festival. When I started it's well over 30 years now, and I think when I started I probably had sort of I wanted to travel. I liked the idea of adventure, and a lot of it was to do with going to fantastic places and seeing what was there. But as I don't know if it's about maturity, but just as you move through and the current climate we're in, I think changes the importance why you do it. And so therefore I think now it's much more, for me and for people I meet coming into the industry, the most recent change, I think, which is now over a decade ago, because it was moving into teaching, which seems relevant, I think, because it's teaching wildlife filmmaking at the university. And I think for me that's about, rather than me making films for myself, is collaborating with students on their films, helping them find their voice at a time where it's increasingly important to communicate to others the challenges of facing the natural world. I think at its best, films to do with the natural world, to do with animals, to do with wildlife, not everybody has the same sensitivities and the same concerns. Film is the perfect medium to engage people, to make them think in different ways. So if you can make a film that appeals to an audience that has no fundamental interest in the world around them, but make them think about it, that's what film's about. It's great to see that people are telling stories and finding new ways to tell stories. You know, this is not from me, it's a well-held principle that stories help us understand the world around us. And that's true of any story, whatever the subject matter. It's crucial when you've got stories that relate to the natural world. So I've seen a lot of films, obviously in various capacities, but I think it's not always about seeing something that's revolutionary and a new approach, but it's about being engaged and entertained. And I think something that stands out for me with many of the films that we've seen in these awards is that they do that. They're thinking about who's going to watch their films, they're thinking about their audience. You know, whether that's structure, visual storytelling, but it's not just relying on beautiful images, because the genre can, in a sense, do that too much. But I think there is a lot, I think in everything I saw, there was a consideration for the viewer about concerns that face the planet, concerns that face species in terms of conservation as a species, as a population, but also down to the individual welfare issues. You know, some of the best films are about individual animals and a relationship with one person, but they can tell you much more. They have a much wider context. Even though the story's simple, they have a much wider context. What I believe is that sort of visual literacy has become so much more important, and I think the availability of the tools that somebody needs to make a film are so much more available. You know, we've seen animation from a very young filmmaker. There are other films made by younger filmmakers. Cameras, editing, graphics tools are all much more available than they ever were, and increasingly so. So I think that's going to drive, you know, they'll gravitate to that as a medium because they watch and consume a lot. If they can also make it, then you're going to get those entries. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, not necessarily in a bad way, but if you go right back, I guess the very young voice wasn't particularly visible. It was more novelty. I think that's changing. I think it's changing because of, you know, that democratization of the medium meant that it's available to so many people. It's available to somebody who's not in a situation where it's easy to make something. They can do that on their own, autonomously. Again, that will drive that you will get more young filmmakers making stuff. And if they see the festival, they'll submit it, or they could submit it. So I think it's great for you to get them. And it's not a novelty voice. I wouldn't never consider it as that. I think, and I don't think you do, and I think it's about giving them as much exposure within the festival as anybody else. So I'm going to start with going to a different medium, the world of art. I think it was somebody like Picasso who said, you know, children know how to draw, and then that's kind of taken away from them, and they become too restricted, and so there it becomes more mannered, and you kind of need to reconnect with your kind of childhood perceptions to really convey, you know, emotion and meaning. And so I would say it's that. If you look at a film made by a very young person, you you can step back from that and think about why they made, not why they made it that way, but learn from them making content their way and not with all the shackles and restrictions that we learn as we get older and more experienced. What I'd like to say is please watch the films that you can from the festival. They're available to you. There's an enormous amount of varied and rich content. It's entertaining, it's educational, it's informative. Please do your best to watch as many as you can. Thank you.